Shepherd's pie is the very loose inspiration for this, since I'm going to make this more tomato-based. I had surgery on my jaw 2.5 years ago, and after that I had to eat soft foods. They're still really good, they're just not crunchy. I'm starting with a little more than 1/2 cup of dried beans that I'm going to cook in the Instant Pot. If you look, you want to pick out any beans that are discolored, and you can pick out any broken ones. Then I cover them with about 1 inch of liquid, and then after they're done cooking, I drain the extra liquid off, and that way I never accidentally make some beans too hard because they weren't covered with enough liquid. I used a mixture of beef stock and water. I cook the beans in the Instant Pot because I can buy a package of dried beans, which will make several servings, as opposed to 1 can of beans. But 1 can of beans works really easy and it's much faster. I'm going to put them on pressure cook for 45 minutes. The beans have been releasing naturally for 1 hour and 19 minutes. I'm going to go pour out the excess liquid, and I'm going to set them to the side while I put the vegetables in the food processor and get them started cooking. For most of the vegetables, I'm going to put them in the food processor, but the carrot and the celery, the onion, I'm just going to cut up by hand. And our onions recently, they've been getting really soft, unfortunately. So you have to throw away like half the onion, which sucks. And this one's really weird because the only bad spot is this spot right in the middle. All the rest of it's fine. That's so bizarre. I try and cut them about 1 millimeter apart because I'm trying to cut the pieces so they're the size that they would be if I had already chewed them. Honestly, that's on a soft food diet, that's how I think of things. If I already chewed them on my own, what size would they be? And then I make them that size before I cook them, so I don't ever have to worry about getting a bite that's too much. You can run the knife through it a few more times to just continue cutting it, getting everything smaller and smaller. Accidentally get pieces on the floor. And the onion I'm going to start cooking in the pan, so I'm going to move the pan over to the stove on medium and put some oil in it. Any type of oil that you normally cook with. I used avocado oil. This is going to make enough for 2 or 3 meals. For the carrot and the celery, I'm going to cut them into 1-inch pieces that I'll put in the food processor. For the carrot, I'm actually gonna chop it in half before I cut it into 1-inch pieces. So cut it in half, and then cut 1-inch pieces. It just seems to fit in the food processor better when I do it that way. There is a method to that madness. And then blitz them into tiny pieces, but not so that they're pureed or baby food. I'm actually going to do 2 carrots. If I'm going to use a whole onion, then I'll do 2 carrots and 2 pieces of celery. You'll also need beef stock or a beef bouillon cube and a can of diced tomatoes and tomato paste. Shepherd's pie is the very loose inspiration for this, since I'm going to make this more tomato-based, but it still uses beef stock. It obviously isn't going to use lamb, so I guess cottage pie would be the loose inspiration for this. But the prep goes pretty quickly since the food processor is doing a lot of the work. I have a lot more carrot than celery, which is fine with me. I love carrots. I really miss being able to eat them. I mean, I am eating them, but eat them the way I used to. Add the onion into the oil that's been warming up. And I'm going to put 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of salt on top of the onion to help it cook. It's been a couple minutes. The onion's starting to get translucent. And I'm going to add in the carrot and the celery and another 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Salt helps draw the moisture out of the vegetables, which helps them cook. And these are all going to cook down. Adding in mushrooms is kind of tempting. You can also add in peas. You have frozen peas. I'm going to need some thyme and rosemary to go in this. I'm going to use fresh because I'm starting to plant out the garden, so I have it. It's been a couple minutes and the mass of vegetables has cooked down. I'm going to let them keep cooking. And I used about 1 tablespoon of oil in the beginning. The oil will also help the vegetables cook. It's been another few minutes and the size of the vegetables has decreased by 1/3 to 1/2. I'm going to cut up some rosemary and some thyme, about 1 tablespoon of fresh herbs or 1 teaspoon of dried. Once the vegetables have cooked down, I'm going to put 1 to 2 tablespoons of tomato paste onto the pan and have it start cooking. It just depends on how strong you want the tomato flavor to be. But since I'm going to be adding in the diced tomatoes, I'm just going to do 1 tablespoon. It's had a couple minutes to cook. You can see it kind of on the bottom of the pan there. I'm going to put in 1 cup of beef stock and scrape that from the bottom of the pan. And then put in the can of diced tomatoes. You can get regular diced tomatoes and you can get petite diced tomatoes. Petite diced tomatoes, I think, are small enough to eat on a soft food diet, but regular diced tomatoes, it depends on how I feel that day. There are some days that the pieces feel too big, and so I just put the diced tomatoes in the food processor and blitz it until it's basically tomato sauce. And some days, the pieces don't seem like they'll be too big. Today I'm going to leave the pieces big. But it's completely a personal preference. I forgot to add the garlic. So I'm going to cut up the garlic real quick, but right now I'm going to add the spices. If you want, you can add 1/2 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. And I'm going to let it cook down so that the liquid it's not so liquidy. And finally the garlic. At least it made it in. Normally I remember halfway through eating. If you're going to use peas, I would add them in as it's done cooking. I would have them sitting, so I use frozen peas. So I would have the peas defrosting in water while the rest of this cooks, and then I would add them in at the end. I'm going to add in the beans to cook with everything. And I think letting the beans release naturally makes them end up larger. I feel like if I release the steam from the Instant Pot myself, that the beans don't get quite this big. Maybe it's the extra cooking time that they get. Maybe I'm just seeing things. I'm curious if you've tried it both ways. Normally this is served with a layer of mashed potatoes on top, and instead of doing that, I'm just going to cook a sweet potato and pour this over the sweet potato and eat it that way. Once all the extra liquid is gone and it's thickened, it's ready.